Hello and welcome back to this SlimDevOps episode 44. He looks at his notes hastily. If you're watching this on YouTube after the fact, this was originally recorded live or streamed live on twitch.tv/SlimDevOps. If you want to join in these sessions interactively, like Eric, Monica and Primo, who I see are already with us in chat today, then head over to twitch.tv/SlimDevOps and give us a follow there. Today I'm joined by Joseph. Joseph, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. A little bit tired. It's been a bit of a crazy week for us. I guess we'll explain why momentarily. How are you holding up?
I'm doing all right. A little sleep deprived, but other than that, I'm doing fantastic. But that's kind of to be expected. We've been pushing pretty hard to get this released right.
We have. We had a hard deadline to work to, and that's. It's kept us all busy, either be it engineering, pushing out bleeding edge software on a tight deadline, and a whole bunch of events. We've been presenting at DockerCon and doing a whole bunch of our own presentations, including this one. In fact, this live stream concludes our sort of week of DockerCon content, if you will. So, Joseph, could you just introduce yourself? Because I think it's the first time you've been on stream here. So if you could just introduce yourself for the benefit of everyone that's watching.
Yeah, I think this is the first time, actually. So I'm Joseph Barnett. I'm one of the senior technical staff engineers over at SlimAI. A little bit about me. I've been in the industry for a long time, since the late 90s, and done everything from helping the internet become the internet, to network consolidation, to large distributed systems running billing platforms, which is exceptionally fun, to cloud computing and security. I've got a pretty interesting resume, so I've had a lot of fun, and this is actually the first time I've got to really pull up my sleeves and make things for software developers, which I'm truly passionate about because I've made lots of my own tools in my profession. On a personal note, I am a huge family guy. I love to surf and I love to travel, and I spend a ton of time bouncing around regions between North and South America.
Yes, we've got a few of our colleagues at Slim spend their time moving around different places. It's I can't keep up sometimes. I think, I didn't know so-and-so was in France this week or was in Portugal. It's brilliant to follow the travels of everybody. Well, we are here today to talk about our Docker extension. So we were part of the Docker Extension Partner Program. I think that's the right term. So I think the right place to start is, for some of you that have seen these streams, you may already know this because we did a stream a couple of days ago with Sam, who talked about how we designed the Docker extension. And a few weeks ago I had Evan on, and he was talking about the developer experience in terms of, creating the extension. And today Joseph is going to tell us about, well, how did we actually build this thing? But I think the first important question is, what is a Docker extension?
So a Docker extension is a plugin to the Docker desktop environment. With Docker desktop, you have a VM running on your machine. It allows you to interact with your Docker containers as they're running. And with the ability to extend the Docker desktop, you can add new tools to your toolbox and do new things, which is kind of cool.
And have you looked at any of the other extensions that have been published so far?
Yes, but probably not from a use standpoint.
Right.
During DockerCon, there was a number of extensions, and I was listening to some of the talks and watching some of the engineering teams that have contributed extensions run their extensions, and I think mostly that's my experience with them, other than kind of using them for my own fodder.
Right, I see. You're going to have to elaborate on that point, I think.
Sure. I guess maybe that really kind of takes us into a story of how is this thing born.
Right.
I want to say it's only maybe 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago. It was not a long time. Kyle and John came to me and Evan and asked, hey, can you guys put together a Docker desktop extension? And we said, what's that? And so, it took about a week for us to get access to like the inside documentation for Docker, and it was just really slow getting started. And then we looked at the extensions that were available and the documentation there, and it was exceptionally thin. You can tell like even their team was moving at a breakneck pace to try and get this stuff live and get the partner program alive. And unfortunately, none of those extensions really worked well. They worked fine. They just didn't do a whole lot, and so they weren't particularly useful. And so the next thing I did was I started using our tools that we build to look at other extensions that were alive and out there, and kind of use those as a model for my learning exercise. Kind of like, I guess it's tantamount to, as a developer, I remember, 20 years ago, I used to go sit and read college's stacks and read all of these comp sci books and try and understand algorithms. And that was really the hard way. As the internet transformed itself over the last 20 years, you kind of go to Google. A lot of people go to Google. My first stop is generally GitHub, searching GitHub for examples that I want. And I look at code that way. To try and understand, like, how would I do X? With our tool set, you can kind of do the same thing by looking inside containers, which I basically did with some of the containers. And I found some really cool surprises there.
So I think we'll get into the sort of the surprises you found, and also how you unwrap those surprises in just a moment. So we had a taster of this conversation last night because you and I were part of our SlimAI DockerCon after party, which we held in our Discord with members of the community. So we had a little chat about this, and I think you and I have got slightly different perspectives on sort of the value of the Docker desktop extensions, or who they're valuable to. So, what do you see as the value of the Docker extensions?
Well, so going back to it kind of goes back to, my roots as an engineer. Something that I've believed ever since I began designing software was really great software just gets out of the way. You don't want yet another tool. And I would take that a little further and say, I don't want things to get in my way, and I don't want things too far away. Because if I'm reaching too far, then in many cases, I'm losing context of what I'm doing. It's really easy to get distracted, especially when you're trying to hold a big problem. And when I start to think about tools and Docker Desktop, I haven't really heard, and maybe there is, and this was discussed at DockerCon, and I just missed it. But there was no, when we got started, there was no unifying vision of what is Docker Desktop. How is it going to really advocate for the developer? How is it going to make this a great piece of software, maybe a cohesive ecosystem where the developer can do their thing, but doesn't really get in the way? And it also felt like yet another tool. And so when I started thinking about that, and I was given this opportunity to make this piece of software, I really wanted to say, okay, how do we make something that first does something really useful for a developer, and how can we start to extend that? How do we extend that to actually make Docker Desktop something like this usable environment, so I can hit many points? And I also know my audience isn't just developers; it's security engineers and security analysts and many other people. And I also know that there's a gap in our current development and operations culture within engineering. And guys like myself, it's not uncommon for me to make 200 line or 200 file code changes between commits. And, people hate me for that. I'm super sorry. But it happens, especially if you're moving really fast and trying to do something innovative.
Yeah.
And so when I started thinking about those things, I started thinking, how do I solve some of those gaps for engineers? How do I make something within the Docker Desktop environment or maybe even in any other environment for that matter, that actually does something useful and just gets out of the way and lets them do their thing. And then captures things that they have missing today. And what I mean by that is, for example, how might you capture changes in your code if you're doing 500 builds within the last 150 file changes and you have yet committed, which is maybe bad practice, I don't know. It depends on the person, but can you capture those snapshots by themselves without actually having to worry about going to the command line, reaching out, doing a code commit, and those types of things. And so I was thinking a lot about those flows.
I think that's an interesting point. Certainly, I think I share something in common with you there, in that when I sit down to code something, I tend to work on a lot of things at the same time. I have limited time, so I tend to just work on everything that I can work on. So consequently, I then have a bunch of changes that I can then, in my case, compile and test. But I'm testing that sort of in aggregate. And then after the fact, I use tooling to then review the code and actually sort of cherry pick the hunks that make up a feature and just commit. I may have a dozen features that I've worked on, but I will commit them as discrete changes after the fact, but I work on things in aggregate. And I think what you're driving at here is, in the container space, you may have worked on a bunch of code changes and you spit out a new container image. And how do you see the differential between this new container image you've got and the last one that you produced? And that's what our tooling enables you to take a look at.
Yes.
So, I think the next thing to get into is, how on earth did you start this adventure? Because this was brand new, as you said. You were asked to make something, and your first question is, well, what is a Docker extension?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I did was I made an application that had very little to do with Slim. I'm just trying to make sure I have something available for our audience. Sorry about that. All right. So what I did is I basically started with making a to-do app. I found an open source to-do app written in React and Go, and I thought, wow, let's just make a to-do app. What better application for Hello World in Docker Desktop than to do an extension for to-do. So I did that just as a learning exercise. And I used that to develop different capabilities or different extensions within the process, so that I could do more and more different types of things. But if you look at say React applications and reactive programming, it's a really great model if you're making something like a desktop app or some sort of plugin to a desktop app.
Right.
So I started there. The next piece was I had a terrible time extending, making the extension actually do anything. And that's where I started using our own tools, our ability to X-ray containers. And, I went through the examples, and the examples, I just stumbled time and again. And then, you read things like, oh, well, you need to set up socket communication between your front end and your back end. And the more I looked at those examples, the more I thought, well, yeah, these are not great. And I was able to get a socket working and start pushing things across, and it was very challenging. And so, and more challenging than any of that was simply just getting the configuration right. There's a metadata.json file you have to configure for your back end. You have a Docker compose file, and you point to those in your metadata.json file. And of course, that's it. That's the limit of your configuration. There is no configuration interface yet. There is no ability to pass in variables. And so you're kind of stuck with this quite static component. And I couldn't actually make that work for the back end, which was really strange. I couldn't get that communication working. And so what I did is I I started looking at other people's extensions and reverse engineered one that was really super interesting from one of the Docker developers. It was kind of cool, and maybe I'll get a preview some of that stuff today. But
okay.
It was neat because he was actually using Docker Slim under the covers.
Yeah, so this was interesting. So you sort of assembled everybody on like week 1 of this journey and said, let's see what we can learn. And you'd found this container image, and you'd found this by using our tooling to search the repositories in order to turn these images up that, as we since learned, were not just created by an engineer at Docker, but by the engineer at Docker who was creating the Docker extension program, which we didn't realize, I don't think, until yesterday when we saw him presenting at DockerCon.
Yeah, that's right.
So yeah, you sort of kind of found their Skunkworks projects, and they were using our stuff, and then we were then using our stuff to find them using our stuff and learned from it.
That's exactly right, and I thought that was actually kind of a very very interesting circle, because it, on one side of it, it was like, hey, this is really cool. They're using our stuff. The other side of that was, oh, this is not so cool. I have to make something way better. And hopefully I did that.
So you talked a little bit about using our tools, and you looking at these examples and what have you. Can you show us some examples of like how you poked around at this stuff?
Yeah, let me open up my Docker desktop and get us started. So
okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yep, we can.
All right. So I'm in debug mode, so you'll have to forgive me. I will just close all of that noise. Okay, so this is the extension. When you come into it, it's just got a little screen. Okay, and these are the images that I have on my machine. And so, for example, let's do exactly what I did. Let me open this up. Let me pull down one of my favorite extensions, Docker pull. Copy the right thing. Sorry about that. We go. And what's cool is, well, we'll let that do its thing. Go back to the screen. Ooh, we know he's here. Oh, there he is. Let's check him out. Okay, so I'm going to select this, and I'm just going to X-ray it. And what this is doing is this is reverse engineering the container and the layers, and giving me a peek into, who is the root user, various different information about the container and what's inside. You've kind of got this full report. And then I can look at his Docker file. And I did this, and this actually helped me quite a bit because, knowing exactly what the path is was not documented. Hint, hint, Docker guys. Was not documented that you would want to use this specific path for your socket. And so this was almost one of those things that you have to know, unfortunately, because it wasn't in the documentation at the time, to get this thing running and get it off the ground. The other thing that I like doing is just looking at, I can look at the layers, and look at what was added in what layer. That's pretty interesting. But really, the most important pieces for me were to look at his metadata JSON file and understand, what is the configuration block look like for something that's doing something meaningful. Like, here you have the back end, and you have to tell it what the socket name will be, and then you have your front end, or you have your back end and your front end, and then the back end you need to do the same thing and say it exposes that. And so what they end up doing. And we were testing this on Windows, and we were testing this on Mac, and then when they got Linux out, testing it on that. And what they were doing is, typically in lower level programming, when you're doing socket programming, you have named pipes in Windows, and you have Unix sockets in Linux and on Mac, which is running Linux in the VM. So it was really important to understand this and understand what was really happening and how Docker was wiring those things up. And so this was a great example for me. And then, of
And
course,
I'm just going to fill in some gaps. So people watching this are thinking, well, you're using the Slim extension to look at this. But of course, the SlimAI Docker Extension is most of the exploration and analysis tools that we have in our SaaS platform. So you did this exploration initially using our SaaS platform.
That's exactly right. I used our SaaS platform for this originally. And then we still use much of the SaaS platform in here with certain limitations. We wanted to be really conscious of, people's anonymity. So this is anonymous by default. We wanted to be conscious of not sending out anything other than the report, so that we could understand, what does the file metadata look like, other things like that. But the content of their files, for example, when I click this and we look at that file content, that's actually being served from the local machine, so that we're not sending out any intellectual property to our ecosystem.
Very good. So you basically were able to sort of grok the essential clues, the clues that were missing from at that time prototype sort of documentation, in order to start to scaffold something together.
Yeah, that's right. And some of the, for example, if we look at this file content, this is a really, really simple Docker file, and I loved how simple it was. I loved that he was using an abstraction, which makes it easy for me to do a build locally and then push that, or retag that and push that to another repository, which means the repository path changes. So this was like a really important clue for me. It was really important to know that I could do something like mount the Docker socket, so I could get access to commands from within my backend.
And so how did you go from sort of, picking this apart to an initial prototype?
So I used this. I made a ToDo app. Everybody was like, you made a ToDo app.
Culturally within Slim, everything starts with a ToDo app, is what I've learned.
Yeah, pretty much. That goes way back to our roots. I think everything in the world is a hello world, and essentially when you think about trying to, there's a number of really great thinkers out there, and I've heard quotes like, try to bring the problem down to the smallest possible component. And with this, I did exactly that. I tried to take something that literally just had one API and a UI that was, literally maybe 50 lines of code, and stuff those into the extension, or stuff those into an extension to see it work. And then, try and understand what are some of the gotchas there. And like any great project, you're going to iterate on that. And so I use that as my foundation. I continue to iterate. And I think Don Box said it right. I don't actually write the great software until I've written it 3 times.
Right.
And so, I've rewritten this extension at least 3 times to really get that feel that is right for the users. And I can show you some of those features if you're interested, and talk a little bit about them. But for example, hey, I want to find out what's on my system and my extension, because this is my development system. And I don't know if you actually caught that, but that was real-time eventing. Just kind of like Docker pull. Hello. So, trying to get those look and feel so that whatever you're doing, it just works, right? And it's responsive and it's quick and it feels right. Now you can't actually, let me clear this. You can actually do some pretty cool things like, oh, I don't want to do that. Okay, I might have found a bug, but I'm on a development branch. I'm going to ignore that for a minute. So I can do some pretty cool things, like I can kick off a ton of these, and if I'm interested in them,
didn't even occur to me to try doing that.
Yeah. So like the experience is really important, and then I don't know what that file is. Oh, it's an app. Okay. We don't look at binary files. So let's look at something that's non-binary. Okay. So I think we've looked at that file content. And the other thing is trying to do things like making sure I'm not expanding any of the file content, so I'm not polluting the disk. And then if something doesn't get used for some time, that's interesting. It gets cleaned up over time. So you'd end up maybe having to redo the scan if you looked at it like 4 weeks ago.
Right.
But other than that, I try to be really conscious about, keeping only what we need to. And unless you're accessing, why unpack it? Just little tiny things to make the experience nice, make sure I'm not polluting the environment, make sure, unless you want to, we're not really using up a lot of CPU power, because I know that was something in my past that I would get really frustrated with certain tools. And so we've done a lot of hard work to make sure that those things work well.
Excellent. So we've obviously got an array of features in the SaaS platform, but as you alluded to earlier, we had a very short amount of time to work on this, literally a matter of weeks. In fact, it would be more fair to measure it in days. So how did you sort of...
You need a bigger number. If we measured it in hours, I think it feels more impressive, because it was a lot of time,
Yeah.
And if we look at this, some of this stuff, we look at some of the capabilities. For example, let me just do a compare here. I select one, I select the other version. And this is something that I would expect a developer to do time and time again, right? Now, there's a number of features I haven't exposed, which I want to make available to our users. But for example, things like this, being able to look at the diff of file content and know, between these two versions, this is maybe what I changed, if it's text readable. I have other secret projects going on. I don't know if I'm allowed to share. I might get fired. I'm waiting for my boss to actually tell me in real time whether or not I can show them. But yeah.
So I'm not. Oh, you're allowed. Apparently, Josh is telling me you're allowed.
Oh, all right. So some of the other cool stuff we got working is, if you do have, if you did go, I'd have to delete this token later, so now, if you noticed before, when I did a search, I was just searching locally. So I get my local search results really quick. I'm still developing this piece, but we're also getting search results from the cloud. And I think this is really great, especially if you have connected registries and you have, all of your private registries, and you want to maybe find out, or you want to grab kind of your cloud of images, and you want to look at something and eventually get to where you can compare a local and a remote as well. But you can look at these, and you can look at them, and they're pretty fast. Does this have any interesting files? I don't know. Maybe this. Yeah, here we go. And so I'm actually looking at them on the cloud, and I'm not polluting my disk. I'm not, and you'll notice that, like, I'm getting them from my AWS accounts, but let's do something. Nginx. Like, I have no Nginx locally. I might have found another refresh. No, that's right. I have no local, but there are ones in the cloud, and so I can. This is a hardened image. Let's see how hard it is. And I might want to look at some base image, etc., and understand what's in it before I ever pull it in.
Right.
And so this makes kind of a nice extension for being able to do just that. Trying to understand maybe what are the differences between images. There's nothing at home.
Yeah. This is exactly something that we did, Pete and I did. We were doing some work where we built an app over several weeks. It was a monolithic app, and over time it went into Docker Compose, and we broke out the constituent parts. And in the last piece, we added an Nginx reverse proxy. and we were using precisely this mechanism of inspecting the different Nginx proxy projects to take a look at them and actually make a determination as which was well constructed, which was a quality container, and did what we wanted to do in order to determine which component we were going to bring into our project, and being able to do some due diligence in the process.
Yeah, and this is kind of cool, and I would expect eventually there'll be a host of buttons here to kind of help you understand the image, maybe even doing things like, pull it down because I want it, or sync it to maybe your cloud ecosystem, maybe to one of your registries. You have connected through Slim.
And for those of you that may be here for the first time, the search feature that Joseph is showing us here, in our SaaS platform, you can connect your multiple registries and search them in aggregate, and that's exposed in at least this dev build of the Docker extension. This is not in the public build of our Docker extension.
This is not in the public build. Yeah, I would expect this to drop in the next day or two. I really wanted to release it today, but software engineering is way harder than most people give us credit for.
So, how did you sort of decide which of the features we have in the SaaS platform we're going to make into our initial version?
That's a good question. I guess I looked for the features that I needed most right now just to build the extension. I needed to be able to look. I needed to be able to look into images. I have a lot of features we haven't yet decided to release yet. Things like being able to pull images, etc. But I looked at the ones that I found valuable and I needed right now, and I wanted to have as part of my toolkit. And so I really focused on those. There are a host of others when you start thinking about local development that blend between doing something local and something in the cloud really plays nicely. And so I'm hoping to be able to actually deliver a lot of those and just make developers' lives generally easier, and so that they can tell their security, their app security team that they work with in their daily grind to go pound sand, go look for yourself. Here's all the content.
Yes, indeed. Very good. And what tooling and frameworks have we selected to put this all together?
So this is actually running a NuxtJS front end, which is kind of cool. And then I'm running Golang on the back end.
Right. So essentially exactly the same technologies that we use in the SaaS platform.
Exactly right.
Did you have to make any compensations with any of that because of the nature of it running in an extension?
Yeah. Fundamentally, the extension is almost a self-contained standalone app of some of the features that we have. And then in many ways, it's also a proxy. So if you think about the development models themselves, even though the technologies are the same, they're completely different, right? When you're running inside of Docker Desktop, you're running as an SPA page. Docker Desktop hasn't yet provided, and I don't know the future of that, and I'd love to, the ability to integrate different events coming from Docker Desktop or maybe even from other extensions. But when you think about that mental model, it's potentially significantly different.
Right.
The idea of having a remote integration, which is Docker Slim, and then local integrations, which potentially are Docker Desktop.
I understand. So I think we've already covered, it was a tight schedule, but in fact, we have a question. So let me just bring up this question. So Graham is asking, is the desktop basically an Electron app? So I think Graham is asking, is Docker
about
Desktop
Docker Desktop? Yes, it is. As far as I understand it, yes, it is.
Yeah, and that is something that I spoke to Evan about when we were first sort of, teasing that we were working on this, and he was explaining that was a new framework that he'd never worked in before. So part of his sort of, process was writing a ToDo app in Electron. The standard starting point.
That's right. Yes, as a matter of fact, I had mentioned that we started with React, and
Right.
just simple Go server, a Gin server actually, um, and we replaced that, right? That whole front end, whatever I did there, we had to throw away, which is really good prototyping practice, and we did it in Nuxt.
Yeah.
Nuxt in Vue, actually.
Yes, which we've used here in the little app that Pete and I wrote. We got familiar. In fact, we had Evan come on 1 week with us to help straighten out our code, because we were Nuxt and Vuetify newbies, and he helped us find the happy path with what we were trying to do. And really, it was an example project, really, to sort of play around with the underpinnings of the container and Docker Slim and what have you. But we ended up, getting a bit too carried away with making our app pretty. So how many of the team were involved in creating the extension?
That would be me and Evan. That was it. Other than people, making recommendations, being beta testers for us. So if I looked at the testers, it was all of the team. So we've got a great support system over here. But writing the actual code, that was me and Evan.
And I think you've said that you've gone through that prototype build, throw it away, start again cycle 3 times in order to get to a place where you were happy with what you created. But if you look back again, what did you learn from that process that other developers might find valuable, and what would you maybe do differently if you were doing it again?
Oof, that's a hard question, because I've been doing this a long time, and I wouldn't say that's kind of a hard question, and mostly because after 20 plus years of doing development, everything changes and nothing changes. You always start simple. You always do the simplest path solution you can, and then once you make something, you step back and you say, does it make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. Okay, great. We've got some value here. Is the experience what I want it to be? And generally, that's when you start scratching your head and looking harder at the architecture and the way you've designed the software, and maybe say, hey, I need to do a wholesale rewrite. Everything initially was just polling. Mm-hmm. And this is where I was chuckling during DockerCon yesterday, is because if you look at most of the extensions, I got the distinct impression most of them are poll-based applications. There's no real-time eventing going from their back end to their front end. And you can see it in the rendering speeds that they have. And so when you start to think about great software, not only does it have to get out of the way, it has to satisfy my need for instant gratification. And we worked really hard for that. And that was some of the lessons learned. That's something I've been doing a long time. But those are some of the lessons learned that I hope to convey to young engineers is, just try and make it work, then make it better.
Right.
Never try to abstract from day one. That's always a bad idea. Copy and paste. You copy paste it twice. Okay, well, maybe we need to make a method that other things can call. But in today's environment, when you have 6 weeks to deliver something and you've got like this hard deadline of DockerCon and Twitch streams and all of these people coming at you wanting your attention and all of that noise, you have to move. And moving simply means sometimes just making it work so that you can demo it, they can get excited, you're helping your team get excited, and then doing the right thing. Right. And sometimes that's the crux or the cross that engineers bear, which is having to go back, spend many, many hours to make it right so that they can live with it, they can sleep at night. Some of the lessons learned, and these are really important lessons for engineers in general. If you're going to use something like a database, you probably want to think pretty early about your database models and how that changes. I changed from a binary in-memory database model to something different, mostly because I found that it was unstable. And, as I changed models, the database reads would fail and other things like that. So I had real challenges that immediately drove me to, okay, now I have to have some sort of schema management. Like when you start to make software that's going to be durable and you're delivering that to the masses, you have to think about certain durability components. Like, how do you manage schemas and other things like that? And when you're doing that, you're not thinking about that from day one. You're going for, let me make something that shows that we can do this. And then you have to take those quality cycles. You have to build in the ability to debug the application later when it's shipped. And you have to think about, once I've shipped this, how will I possibly get information if somebody's running into trouble? How do I help them? Right. And so those are all things that, I wouldn't say I necessarily learned on this one project, but something that I think comes into almost every project. And it's exceptionally important, especially in shrink wrapped software. That's what I like to call this.
Yeah. So you made an interesting point there at the sort of the beginning. Then you were talking about making it work. You had to move quickly, and how you would like to make software that is maintainable, that you can come back to and work on as projects require that. So I suppose at the moment there's a risk that if we just walk away from where things are at the moment, we could start to incur some technical debt because we've had to work quickly on this, and we probably need to make sure that it's appropriately polished so that it's suitable for sort of long-term maintenance.
I'll split hairs there.
Okay.
We have a really great culture here, and quickly doesn't mean sloppy. Right. So, Evan and I made sure we commented our code. That's, rule one. Leave comments, leave breadcrumbs. Somebody's going to come read this, and it may not be you, or it may be you 2 years later, and you're scratching your head and thinking, "What did I write?"
Yeah.
Make diagrams. Diagrams are cheap. They're fast. Developers love to make them. Stick them in the repository so that you understand the architecture that you've built and some of the highlights, so that it's really easy to jump back in if you're coming back to the project, or if you're coming into the project new, and then write tests. I'm not a huge advocate for writing a unit test for every single thing you do. Write functional tests so that you understand, like, this component is working or it's not working. And when I write functional tests, I generally tie them to some component in the system, and I make sure that not only do they work in singular, but I make sure I do parallel runs or pressure runs against those in the same unit testing, and tie those into the CI, so that build over build, I can sleep. If Evan comes in and he's doing some changes, he has some confidence that he hasn't broken anything that I've been working on, and vice versa.
Indeed, and I think we're seeing that very sort of discipline and culture pay dividends at the moment, because Evan, who we've been referring to, is now out for a few days to go and sit in a cool, dark room in order to sort of recover and recuperate. And
yeah, I definitely need one too.
And you find yourselves in the position now where you're the single point to sort of look at this stuff and work on the initial sharp edges that people are finding, but because of the collaboration that the two of you have had during this sort of frantic period, you're able to run with it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and there's an important aspect of our culture. It's just in our DNA. We're all remote, and we're not in the same location. We're not in the same time zone. So doing some of these things is critical to the communication gap that you would have by not sitting next to a guy every day.
Right.
We make sure we spend time together every day, and me and him, at least every day, if not every other day, would jump on Discord, kind of like we were gaming, sharing screens at the same time, and just hacking away and merging at the same time, and then pulling changes, and in real time doing what I think is extreme programming, maybe, where we're doing pair programming, except we both had the keyboard, which was a lot of fun.
Very good. Yeah, I saw earlier that you got a session going. Yeah, that was good. Right. We had a couple of questions that I've sort of fielded as we've gone along. Here we go. So Graham has another question. Graham asks, were there reasons from switching from React to Nuxt or were the reasons? Were the reasons switching from React to Nux technical, personal preference, or something else?
Great question, Graham. I like React. Our CTO had started the Slim using Nuxt, and that was just a technology that we use internally. So we don't want to get technological sprawl within the organization. That cognitive load is too heavy in most cases, and I've seen it destroy projects. And so it's fun to program and move fast with something that you know you're comfortable with, and you can do things very quickly, versus technologies that you want to harden and make commercial.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. When you've got a relatively small team and you're building a center of excellence around some components and technologies, limiting where the amount of mind share that each of those has to occupy is very important. A few jobs back, I built a small dev team to create a new platform for where we were working, and we actually had the luxury of going and evaluating, well, what language are we going to use? And we knew that we were going to be working on a bunch of different stuff. We knew we needed a web app, we knew we needed a sort of an advanced analysis engine, and we also needed to be able to do hardware integrations and sort of forensic level data recovery. This was off black box flight recorders. And I think when we were doing that initial scoping, it was like 2008, 2009. And I knew I was only going to ever have 6 people working on all of this stuff together. So we chose Python, and we chose Django, and we chose NumPy and SciPy, and using sort of a fixed set in the stack, we were able to sort of use that to do everything that we needed to do in all of the places that we needed to code stuff.
Well, and I agree with that. I think there's some really important points. Once you've spent any time in the industry for a while, as you grow, if this was a pet project, I probably would have done the front end enclosure or React. Those are both fun technologies, and React, I can move really fast. I like it because if I needed to hire people and I was serious about my business, there is a lot of React engineers, which means there's a lot of talent to help me. At the same time, it's important to look at the ecosystem of technology and how it's moving in ways, right? If I wanted to do some machine learning, would I be using Spark or would I be using Hadoop? Hadoop was one of the first platforms out there. It's a great platform, but I probably want to pick something newer.
Yeah. Oh, I think we may have lost Joseph there. That's unfortunate. We have lost Joseph. So whilst I wait for Joseph to rejoin, it's not. It may not happen. I see that he's just disconnected from the control room. We'll see if Joseph can rejoin us. If not, if there are any remaining questions, I'll try and field those. But I will say a few things. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, welcome. You can find us at SlimAI. That's the URL above my head. And that's in fact, Josh has asked a very good question I'll get to in a moment. So if you want to join in with more of these, and also we do office hours and community exclusive events in our Discord, come and follow us there, and the bot has been putting that in the chat, and you'll find links in the URL above my head. So the question that Josh has asked, hello, welcome back. Let me just unmute you in the control room. Hello, welcome back. Josh has just asked, Martin, would the Docker extension, the SlimAI Docker extension, have helped you and Pete on previous streams? Absolutely. I'll tell you where that would have helped us. A bit like what Joseph was saying about, needing to go fast. When we're preparing our demos and tutorials and workshops, there's a lot of stuff we have to get done in a limited amount of time. And in order to actually sort of demonstrate the exploration, diffing, and all of that stuff in the SaaS platform, we have to then push images up to Docker Hub. So we have to have a load of images locally in order to do the demos, and then we have to have them pre-prepared up in Docker Hub as well in order to then show it on the SaaS platform. So it would have been nice if we had the extension, because we could have just done everything locally and skipped out that piece in the middle there. And I think what's interesting about that is I can see us using the extension as like a standard way to sort of access the Slim platform tools when we're doing sort of, workshops and things of that nature, because it's something that everyone can have quick access to in their familiar dev environment. And I would have found it easy. I've been doing some sort of container image dissections recently. And that's great using the SaaS platform, but it would be really good to actually load them all up locally and be able to pick through them with the extension. So welcome back. I think you just about got to the end of your question, your answer for Graham there.
Yeah, I don't know where I dropped out. I like to talk.
I'm sure Graham will let us know if he feels his question's gone unanswered. So I think we've answered the questions that we've got. Thank you very much, Joseph, for joining us today and sharing your experiences making this. If there are any of you out there that are thinking, I'd like to make a Docker desktop extension, maybe you know of an open source tool for the Docker ecosystem that you'd like to build an extension around, by all means have a go. In fact, if you join our Discord, I'll post some links to where you can find the SDK documentation. If you Google Docker Extension SDK, you'll find it too, but I'll stick it in our Discord. And if you give it a go, let us know what you're making, because we'd love to have a look. And if you get stuck, also let us know. Because we'll have a go at maybe helping you and pointing you in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we do have an article already up on our blog. Again, it's above my head. Sam wrote a piece about how the design process works for the for Docker extensions. And when he was on the stream a couple of days ago, and the VOD is available here now, so you can go and watch it after. He actually built a prototyping tool in Figma for designing desktop extensions, and that's under an open source license, so you can just pull that into your Figma design tool and start prototyping your extension UI. Right, well with that, thanks very much, Joseph. That was an excellent conversation. I hope I can invite you back on here in the not too distant future, so you can tell us about how not just the extension has advanced, but also some of the other features we're working on in the SaaS platform.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love that. And thanks, Martin. I appreciate you having me. And thank you, everybody who's watching. I love creating great software. If you have questions, ping me on Discord or the community channels, or seek me out. I like making new friends.
Thanks very much. Well, with that, we'll put a bow on it. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you soon. Traditionally, we stream on a Thursday, which is tomorrow. We're not going to be doing that on account of the 3 or 4 streams we've already done this week. And we won't be doing a stream next week either, or at least we're not planning to, because a bunch of us are going to be at KubeCon in Valencia, Spain, including myself. And I don't fancy the prospect of trying to stream from a laptop on a conference table over Wi-Fi. But I'm taking all of the equipment, and if it's technically possible and we're not completely exhausted and we have the time, we may give it a go. But we're not making any promises.
We need to get you a hero hat.
Well, not yet, because I haven't committed to anything. But I do have a very interesting little miniature laptop behind me, which has HDMI capture, and I think that could be like the streaming hub. But I digress.
I can send you a Raspberry Pi or maybe one of those newer ones. We'll just put Linux on it. We can stream right through that. You put a cap on with a Hero 4, which is relatively reasonable. You can do some live streaming of what's going on in the conference.
You're speaking my language now. Right, well, with that prospect, send your tips to community@SlimAI for how to stream with a Raspberry Pi from the conference floor. I look forward to your solutions. Right, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.